So good evening, everyone, and good afternoon to Professor Rog'er Azevedo, who is joining us from Florida once again. I hope you all enjoyed the conference yesterday, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the post-conference session of the 21st Chase Conference on the Study of Innovation and Learning Technologies. We're honored to have Professor Azevedo with us once again. By the way, Roger, today was supposed to be your trip to Masada in the Dead Sea, but this is fun too.
Yes,
Um, so
next time.
we hope you will soon be able to visit Israel and enjoy all of the activities we had planned for you. And we're truly grateful that you agreed to deliver the conference keynotes, even though you were unable to join us in person. So thank you again for being here with us.
Thank you.
And without further delay, it is my pleasure to once again introduce Professor Rog'er Azevedo from the School of Modeling, Simulation, and Training at the University of Central Florida. Professor Azevedo is an internationally recognized authority on self-regulated learning. His research is distinguished by its interdisciplinary nature, examining the cognitive, metacognitive, emotional, motivational, and social processes involved in learning with advanced technologies. He serves as co-author-in-chief of the British Journal of Educational Psychology and sits on the editorial boards of several top-tier journals in learning and cognitive sciences. And he's the author and co-author of over 300 publications. So Professor Azevedo will now deliver his second keynote lecture entitled, Can AI Teach Us How to Learn? Wait, perhaps you changed it or no? Yeah, you did. So enhancing human
Change it a
AI
bit.
collaboration using human digital twins to support learning, performance, problem solving, and reasoning across diverse humans, tasks, domains, and contexts. And as in the previous lectures, if you have any questions during the lecture, this is for the audience, you can leave them in the chat. So once again, Roger, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brandel and Blau, also for inviting me virtually, I guess now, the way I had to adapt. And it's a wonderful pleasure to be here and to be given the opportunity to give a keynote. And also thank you, the audience, for being here. I hope I'm not interfering too much with your dinner plans. So this is a little bit of an extension. So yes, I did change the title a little bit, given the fact that I'm assuming most people were at the lecture on Monday. So making a little assumption about, okay. So I changed the title a little bit. I want to spend the first about 10, 11 slides kind of as a summary of like that first phase of where we're going. And then really what I wanted to focus, because I changed the title, is thinking about the human digital twins as a new model and metaphor for how we move in terms of AI in education. Okay, so that's why I started the change in title. And a lot of the work I'm going to be presenting here is funded both by U.S. Foundations, both federal foundations and military foundations, and some Canadian and European foundations, as this research is a bit costly. It takes a lot of resources, right? Not just in terms of technology, but the interdisciplinary nature of the teams that span the US, North America, and the world. So without further ado, kind of a little bit of a summary based on what we talked about on Monday is thinking about the kind of metacognitive cycle, right? So as we move towards just keeping this in mind, right, that there are many processes. I'm not going to go into the distinction between metacognition and self-regulation, just to say that self-regulation is the regulation based on your metacognition, but it does have many different cycles. If you look at all the models that exist, there's a metacognitive awareness, and then there's monitoring, and then there's regulation, and there's evaluation, and then there is a reflection, and hopefully then the human becomes adaptive, right? I've learned enough and I've reflected enough, right? And so the question is, we've used this traditional model, if you will, and even though it looks linear, it is not linear. Please do not take that into consideration, right? It's not seen as a series. It can be in parallel, right? And there's also recursive nature. So it's more challenging, very challenging for us to study this in humans. Now, can you imagine as an AI, if you think about how an AI can be, and one of the questions is, can an AI actually engage in these processes, okay, concurrently with a human? So there are some fundamental AI questions in terms of teaching humans how to learn, right? Who or what is doing the monitoring and self-regulation? Is it the human? Is it the AI? Is it both, right? And then we ask fundamental questions: which part, when, how, why, and is it effective, right? One of the big challenges that we have also when we think about going beyond this kind of cycle, if you will, is that there are phases. If you look at self-regulatory processes or theories and models, there are phases, there are cycles, there are events. And then if you look at the Winnie and Hadwin model, they were even more specific. There are operations, right? And then when we collect multimodal data, we have sequences, and they sometimes occur and co-occur. But the question is, yeah, we can observe that in a human, but does AI engage or potentially engage in some of those issues? And I'm actually going to avoid, but there's an entire area called artificial metacognition, okay, that actually has to be brought in, because really this focus is, because our psychologist is really focused on the human metacognition, okay? And then what phases, processes, and mechanisms underlying all these need to be induced, right? Does the human induce it in the AI? It's like, hey, I'm engaging in metacognitive awareness. I'm not sure that this is the right problem. Can you help me? Right? So awareness monitor, again, all those processes that you see in this colored cycle is, when are they happening, right? And why are they happening, and for whom? Okay, is it the human again? Is it the AI? Is it both? Based on Monday, right, we talked about multimodal, multi-channel data, right? Can we detect all of these processes and operations, right? What are the limitations that we have in terms of multimodal data, right? What assumptions, right? If we look at models, theories, and frameworks of metacognition and learning, right? What assumptions are we making, right? And we see that these models are not being very predictive and explanatory, right? We're still in this phase of science where we're describing things. How does a human monitor and regulate? That's good. How does potentially a human? But when we get to prediction and explanation, right? And then some of the other ones is, once we collect this data, is how do we create an AI system that is actually adaptive, that knows exactly at this point in time, because it's been observing and detecting and sensing what I'm doing, can provide and deal with the actual need that I have currently. Okay. And then we also have to figure out that some of these environments that we build, especially for education and training, is there's always some other instructional model that is not a self-regulation model. So it could be cognitive apprenticeship model, okay, multimedia learning from Rich Mayer, right? So then how do the assumptions of those types of models, instructional models, if you will, interact, right, based on the assumptions of theories and models of self-regulation? And then what is the role of AI or AIs? It can be more than one. In some of our contexts, I'll show you there's more than one. And context. What is the context? Is it a game-based learning environment? Or is that there is a student using a game-based learning environment in a STEM classroom in a particular school in a particular geographical region? So if you think about the microscope, okay, analogy, what is context, okay? And then fundamentally is, can they coexist, co-learn, collaborate, co-regulate, right? If we think about some of the work of Hadwin and Järvelä and others, and do they mutually externalize and regulate each other, okay? And we think that fundamentally that there should be some kind of symbiotic relationship between the human learner and the AI, okay? So those are some of the big questions that we try to address. Of course, we're not addressing any. And the reason why those are in particularly important is because I showed this slide on Monday, is to kind of share with you that, we don't just do lab work, we do also in situ work, right? We do everything from, here's bottom left is a fully instrumented learner, okay, where we have experimental control and we can employ rigor and collect all the data with minimal interventions, right? We have other places like our new environment where we're actually building simulated learner that should be able to embody the self-regulatory processes and the algebra problem solving of a student to be able to model. In that case, it's externalizing. So to trigger that metacognitive process and reactions from the students. In high stakes teams where we induce lots of stress and anxiety, right? And we actually interfere with the clinical decision making. But here we're looking at the combination of emotions and how potentially negative emotions in a very critical medical setting can interfere, if you will, with metacognition self-regulation. And this is a danger, of course. The bottom here, just below it, is when we look at collaborative problem solving. We have two students, we're experimenting with the EEGs, right, and eye tracking. Is there joint attention when they're solving a problem using this thing that is very colorful? And basically, that is tangible computing. That is a different type of learning technology, which is it's a 1-inch kinetic sand. It's got properties, and we're projecting a model of inundation of a coastal region of North Carolina. And basically, the humans have to embody their cognitive strategies through their hands to move the sand, to create barriers, and they get near real-time feedback to see if they have actually caused the dam that is high enough not to inundate the city. Okay. We talked about also kind of making systems such as game-based learning environments showing their open learner model. So a student can actually try to calibrate their metacognitive processes based on the system's beliefs about them as metacognitive agents. In some cases, we are using eye tracking to basically, can we use eye tracking such as a heat map, okay, to accelerate meta comprehension, okay, of a student who may have solved the problem wrong. And then the top one here, which we'll talk about in kind of a couple of minutes, is this development of human digital twins, where we have one of my postdocs, Megan Weisbush. We have a human digital twin of her that currently lives in this huge it looks like a freezer, okay, or a fridge with a. And the question is, can we do disease acceleration? Can we model metacognitive skills and processes? Because Megan here could be a patient, Megan can be a teacher, Megan can be a researcher, etc. Okay, so those are some, because we operate in so many different contexts, those fundamental questions really drive a lot what we do. And then also, as we move along today, is to remember that, was when we talk about trace data, multimodal trace data, is the accuracy in the inferences that we make. So here's a college student solving a parallel programming problems, right, in computer science, which are very challenging. So what happens if we just have the screen recording versus the screen recording with the eye tracking versus the screen recording and the eye tracking, and also some facial expression data analysis. And then what we call the holy grail, is when we have everything, but we have language. And to us, language as a psychologist, as a cognitive scientist, is the most important, because that is really the window into the mind.
You can toggle on the links to display all the time,
okay,
while you build your solution to turn.
So stop that. And then sometimes, so these are all dynamic representations of multimodal. They basically generate a lot of data, right, that we take and use and synthesize.
You can toggle on the links to.
Okay, let's have you stop talking. Thank you. So the question is, how do we use this data in terms of designing the next version of AI systems? Can you imagine having an AI system that, just like we right now are looking at this data, and of course with the human in the loop, can start making inferences and learn more about what this human is? And sometimes it's not just, it could be a static representation, right, such as a heat map. So for example, can we teach an AI to make inferences, right, about what this student's allocation of attention was, because let's say they didn't solve this particular problem correctly. So this is extremely important. So with that, we have a lot of data, right, from click screen data, navigation data, eye gaze data, emotions and physiology. We have linguistics, so whether we're doing a concurrent thing, a lot of protocol, or it could be discourse. For example, if you're looking at classroom, and also there's a lot of performance measures and the different types of errors that some students or humans could commit. And then we also have the temporal and sequential data, right? So for example, can we detect procrastination, or what does that look like, or engagement? So these are some of obviously the footprints, right, or the residue that a human does leave when they're using self-regulated SRL and metacognition during learning with any kind of learning technologies, right? And we talk about the AI being able to sense, but the sensing is, can it detect, and does it need to model, right? Does it need to simulate, et cetera, right? Can it engage in basically the same processes that we talked about early? And then to do this, we go from raw trace data to metacognitive states and other states, right? Not just metacognition, right? So typically we go from raw trace data, we have, so here are the challenges. We may have eye tracking that is at 50 hertz, or maybe it's 1,000 hertz, or 250 hertz. We have click streams, which 100 seconds per session, right? Facial expressions, keystrokes, sometimes it's pauses. In fact, there is a whole new set of articles that are being published that really are focusing, even though when you have all this multimodal data and the human is quiet, is not uttering anything, the question is, what are the other data channels revealing about the human? Why are you quiet? And so quietness, if you will, between utterances. And then we have audio and visual streams, right? Then we go through this process of signal extraction, right? Feature engineering, extraction, noise filtering. And of course, what we try to do here is use our models of self-regulation and metacognition, right, to be able to justify what those features are that we're focusing on, okay? And then we try to make state inferences about these. Can, for example, we estimate cognitive load. People talk about pupil dilation, right? But if I don't control, for example, the lighting, right, that's going to impact, right, metacognitive processes, mechanisms, and states, SRL phases. One of the areas that we are finding that is very challenging is motivation. Motivation has been really challenging because motivation states, if we want to call them states, are occurring at a different temporal dimension. So they're not changing at the millisecond level, at the second level, minute, maybe an hour, maybe days or weeks. Things like self-efficacy. When is that? And so if we have experiments that don't actually aren't long enough, including longitudinal ones, that we actually may miss those motivational states. But we should be able to include those. And then the adaptive intervention, right? If the AI is supposed to adapt, all right, and intervene to facilitate metacognition, self-regulation, learning, etc., then what are some of those decisions? What is the diagnosis, right? What are the scaffolding triggers? For those of you who are interested in actually in the triggers, there was a recent paper by Sana Yarvala, our colleague, and Alison Hadwin in Learning Individual Difference that actually provides some rules of thumb for triggers. What should be the metacognitive message, and several others. And then I put this kind of feedback loop, but to be honest, we rarely do this kind, and that's why it's not a black arrow, it's kind of a yellow arrow, but we should be doing more of that in terms of cycling more, in terms of literature. And then if you see a lot of the recent work, especially in the last 3 years, when people are focusing on AI and, as if AI was just invented, there's a whole field of AI in education that is like 50 years old. Some of us have been trained, even going back to being a grad student. And so people are talking about, AI, human hybrid AI, right? People like Sana Yarvala, Janako. So here is maybe a snapshot or potential approaches in terms of dependency and autonomy, right? So if you go from the left, AI directed, that's purely external regulation, and that's a lot of what we've been doing, right? Where basically the AI is doing or trying to do a lot of the external regulation. One is shared co-regulation, right? But what we need to keep in mind, even models of socially shared regulation are based on assumptions of how humans monitor and regulate. They're not based on the limitations, for example, computational limitations or representational limitations of AI systems. Or should the human be doing all the self-regulation, right? And then can we get to a place where expert autonomy, it's like basically it's more of a reflection tool. Okay, this also becomes a problem when we focus on experts in self-regulation metacognition because they've compiled that knowledge and skills. So it's really hard for them to even, for experts, for example, to express using multimodal data, their metacognitive self-regulatory processes. In terms of hybrid intelligence, this goes back to a lot of the work like, again, Yarvala and then Inga Molinar and some other folks like Mutlu Kukurova. The human learner, the hybrid layer, and then there should be some kind of AI system. And it's kind of the interaction between all of those, right? So maybe there is a co-regulation protocols, which we have yet to develop, if you will, when we think about the next generation of AI. The scaffolding of those, the shared goal representations. Maybe the human and the AI have completely different goals. So if they have completely different goals, how are they going to interact with each other? An issue of dynamic difficulty adjustment is now possible with Gen AI tools, right? And so is real-time trace interpretation. But we also want to get Gen AI tools, for example, to generate synthetic data, right? To facilitate perhaps expertise development, self-regulatory development, et cetera. Okay. And then, so there's still some tensions, and I'll just leave those as here. Algorithmic bias in SRL detection, right? Most of our data focuses on what we call Western educated industrialized rich democratic populations, right? That may not represent everyone in the world. That's a big issue, continues to be a big issue. And that goes along with a question that I think it was TV asked on Monday about facial expressions. Cognitive offloading trap, right? Yeah, it's easy, especially now with the Gen AI tools. Well, I mean, I just basically not going to do anything, right? Because I'm going to offload everything to an AI system. And then also this issue, and this depends on the continent or geographical region, right? The perils of continuous biometric and behavioral monitoring with AI-driven systems, right? For example, I know that Europeans obviously are much more stricter about the data that we can collect on humans than, for example, us here in North America. And then the digital divide, right? Given all this, hardware, software, and the bandwidth, Well, not everyone in the world is able to get that. So are we going to continue basically? Is this going to be a luxury only for those? Sorry for saying this directly, that are rich. Okay. So there's some issues. There's still some practical takeaways, what you can do today, and this is kind of the transition between this and then kind of the next part of the talk that I want to focus on. But right now, so if we think about it, we just took a snapshot for teachers. We need to teach SRL. I know that in the US, teachers do not teach SRL to their kids. Okay, and teachers are not being taught about SRL, emotional regulation, meta motivation, any of that. Okay, we need to integrate those prompts, right? We need to use AI tools for calibration. Okay, and for researchers, really, yes, we should continue to do these multimodal trace studies wherever possible with ecological validity in mind, right? And also something that is very important that we have not seen in the literature is we need to develop new measures of self-regulation and metacognition. We either have self-report measures that are traditionally used, like the metacognitive awareness inventory by Sharon Anderson, okay? Or basically, if you're using a game-based learning environment, for example, can you provide, or for example, if you're using Minecraft education, can you have the student develop a new world, let's say with Minecraft, right? That shows that they're using their self-regulatory and metacognitive processes. So it's less about the content, but more about the learning to learn, okay? For technologists, there's a whole bunch, and we'll talk about this as we transition into the human digital twins, okay? So this is a little bit of a transition. Yes, a lot more to talk about, but let's get into, now we're transitioning into kind of thinking, and that's why I changed the title, to thinking about human digital twins. So if we go back in history for decades, engineers, have digital twins, for example, of cars, of tanks, of airplanes, of some kind of delivery process, let's say Amazon packaging. But the question is, as psychologists, can we have human digital twins, right? Because all these things that we've been talking about on Monday and up to now really show the limitations and challenges of our current AI systems that I also showed snippets on Monday, like intelligent tutoring systems, game-based learning environments, etc. But we're seeing human digital twins as this kind of research platform for designing, development, testing aspects of metacognition and self-regulation. Okay, and we're going to go a little bit more into that. And there's many application areas, right? So some of the ones we talk about today are going to be the K-12, healthcare, and just a sprinkle of military, because that's the ones that we really are focusing on, right? And so the question becomes, what is a human digital twin? Why a human digital twin? Right. Well, if we develop these human digital twins, right, we're trying to, as much as possible, have some kind of fidelity of what a human actually, how they monitor and regulate their learning, for example. We can model real-time adaptation. Of course, we have to have some human in the loops, okay? And we're also using different types of technology, mostly immersive environments, to be able to present that embodiment of the digital twin, okay? And we're going to see some examples of that. And part of this is also from a safety and risk analysis. There are jobs, careers, situations where you don't want the human to be exposed, for example, so we work with, trying to work with Lockheed Martin, right? Lockheed Martin is in the business of creating things like, for example, missiles, right? Well, if we put an inspector, right, the human is going to be exposed to chemicals, etc., right? But if you have a human digital twin, you can send that human digital twin to still do the same inspection. Okay. Same thing if we think about it from teaching perspective. Let's say you have a teacher, a newly graduated, undergrad who's now teaching, right, in, let's say, a very rough neighborhood, right, where there may be a lot of violence, both physical and verbal, in the classroom, unfortunately, right? So how do can we create a human digital twin of that teacher, okay, and model and simulate the potential hazards, if you will, that person can experience in the classroom, unfortunately, okay? So if we go back to human digital twin, so we do have a working definition. It's a personalized computational dynamic model, right? That's supposed to represent somebody's neural, potentially physiological, cognitive, affect, metacognitive, and social characteristics, right? And it's updated in real time or periodically, depending on what the purpose is, right? Is it for modeling? Is it for prediction? Is it for simulating, etc.? Right? And this comes along with a huge pillars, right? Focusing specifically on the fact that we're psychologists and educational researchers, right? And what I'm going to be focusing on today is really the not only the functional capabilities, but basically the data sources and integration, because that goes along with the theme of developing AI agents with multimodal, multi-channel data. So if you're doing medical stuff, for example, it could be that it's electronic patient records. Oops, excuse me. Okay, but it's wearables and devices and other physiological centers. Okay. And then the question becomes, what behavioral multimodal data would you integrate? What environmental sensors would you integrate? And also part of this is that we never throw away the, self-reports, but there could be self-reports of emotions like emotion regulation, right? Motivation, etc. Okay, and then we can model the transparency between human anatomy and agency. So to give you some example of that, goes back to a framework that we developed many moons ago. 4 years ago now, right? So if we are going to be developing human digital twins that are going to be a replica of that human, right? Then the question is, what data do we share? And specifically, like, for example, multimodal data, how will a human teach or communicate and interact and collaborate with their human digital twin? How do we know that they're successful in whatever setting, in a classroom, okay, in a surgical operating room, etc. Okay, and then what is the role of AI? So to give you a chance, so we did see this slide, and I kind of want to elaborate a little bit more. So if we are developing human digital twin, for example, a high school student that is learning biology, then what is the dynamic between that human and its human digital twin, right? Is it just to test the student's knowledge? Is it to scaffold that student, right? But this human digital twin of this young student must have obviously a cognitive or metacognitive architecture embodied so that there is a seamless conversation. Same thing in high school, right? So we have a high school teacher of teaching algebra or math, right? What is the role during classroom interactions that these, and how do they coordinate their efforts? Okay. Some of the work that we do with the Army. So Army tank, there's a crew of 3. Well, the Army now wants a 4th digital twin to basically facilitate mission performance. Well, it's not going to be a physical interaction. It's going to be a voice. But what role, what sensing will it do? How do we instrument these 3 humans and also the outside world as they're engaging in a mission, right? And then some of the work that we do in healthcare. So, for example, it could be a patient, right, who's not being rushed into making a decision regarding treatment options, for example, for cancer, but basically it could be another patient, a digital twin, right, of another patient who's explaining some of the options. In this case, it could be that you have a nurse practitioner and we have a digital twin of a nurse practitioner who's facilitating and scaffolding and perhaps providing expert advice to a young nurse practitioner in terms of patient care. Or in an emergency department, some of the work that we do could be a digital twin that's basically, if you will, stuck on the wall of the clinic, right? And is providing expertise, right? And scaffolding, and basically can see, we're working with biomedical engineering where we're looking at nanomaterials. So imagine that these walls, or at least the walls that I have here in my office, go from being very dumb walls that basically don't have any properties to smart walls that can hear, feel, and sense, right? Maybe they can feel the elevated and see the elevated physiological arousal, right? And because the team is very stressed, and it could potentially, be added as an additional team member to relieve that stress. Okay, so there are many different case studies and opportunities for this. There are many conceptual and theoretical issues also, right? In terms of like defining human AI collaboration, what does that look like? How do we take our current frameworks, right, and integrate AI as an active agent in all these phases and cycles? There is work, as I was mentioning, in artificial metacognition. There are 2 particular metacognitive architectures that I'll show in a couple of slides, called Karina and Mitka by Michael Cox and Manuel Caro. How do we integrate that into our traditional psychology models and theories and frameworks, right? And then many different theoretical issues that need to be addressed, including like the tensions between human-centered and human hybrid machine models for metacognition self-regulation. Again, methodological analytical issues that exist, and we will be exemplifying some of those through some of the slides that are coming up, right? But how do we combine this multimodal data, right, and discourse to capture the interactions between these AI systems, AI agents, right, and their human counterparts, right? And the challenge is synchronizing and aligning and making these accurate inferences based on individuals and not individual data channels, but across data channels, where we still have the human in the loop to be involved here, okay? And so then we get to some fundamental questions. If we are developing a human digital twin, right, of a human, then which features need to be modeled and simulated, right? Is it the human's motives, goals, objectives, beliefs, gender, age, socioeconomic status? If we're looking at medical applications in terms of medical education or training, is it the history of the human, right? Is it their personality? At what level do we need to have some kind of biologically inspired model? Okay, but because this talk is really on self-regulation metacognition, that's why the third column is highlighted. Here we go, at least in this talk, what we're really going to emphasize is the cognitive, the motivation, the emotions, the metacognition, and sometimes the social processes. But what else is missing, right? Because that needs to be modeled, right, in order for us to have a replica of a human. So going back to models is that, of course, all this work that we're doing across different sectors and different fields is modeled after models and frameworks and theories of self-regulations, the ones that we've obviously been using as we design this kind of metacognitive architecture for digital twins is borrowing on Winnie and Hadwin's model, because it's a very phasic model, right? Socially shared model that you see in the middle. Considering also some of the work by DeMello and Gracer in terms of the affect dynamics, but also some of the work, like, for example, by Klaus Scherer, who talks about emotions being multi-componential, and then basically how do we model those into the human. But of course, there's a lot many other models that are not represented here. So, for example, Ackerman's meta reasoning work and several other works. Okay, so when we think about doing this is the next version of the AI system and agents, is that we really need to integrate. What I try to do here on top is imagine being able to create a traditional metacognitive model, such as the Winnie and Hadwin model, okay, with one of those metacognitive architecture, either Cox's model or Caro's model. And I don't have time to go into the details, but I'd be happy to share this. But our approach has been that we integrate Winnie's model with these two metacognitive architectures, right? We emphasize the 4 stages or phases, if you will, of the Hadwin's model, along with the object level and the meta level, okay, and also the other mechanisms and parameters that Cox and Caro have explained. We need to include the dynamics, okay, of these temporally unfolding SRL processes. And also the question then becomes, what are the contextual variables and factors that that the human digital twin needs to know and therefore need to be modeled in the digital twin? But of course, there's still some other challenges beyond the cognitive metacognitive. There are some challenges that are included when we try to integrate some of the more challenging aspects of self-regulation metacognition. And also it's the affect and motivation in particular, and then the social processes, especially in terms of communication between the AI and the human. So computationally, that's some of the work, all right? And the question becomes, well, why is this important? And I think I've showed this video. So this is a video of one of our typical students, right? Fully instrumented using a game-based learning environment for pandemics. They're learning about viruses, they're building their own virus, and then they can unleash the virus. Just clip the base for a little bit, doing a concurrent
How many vaccine doses per day average could be delivered for this simulation?
So they're learning about this, and then they get to a point after
Ever be very confident.
They've unleashed the virus, and they get to see how the virus. So this student is generating tons of multimodal data, facial expressions. Stop here, right? So you got facial expressions, you got physiology, you got log file data, you got screen recordings, okay? And we also, beyond the interaction and the log file data, we also have another view, which is the bird's eye view of everything. So there's a lot of data channels going in. So if we're going to design a digital twin of the student, then here's the question, right? So imagine the student, you just saw a little snippet of that data, right? That student is generating tons of multimodal trace data that is basically could be fed to his digital twin, right? The question then becomes, this digital twin, or as we're building its brain based on all this data that the student is building, is then also with the human in the loop that I'll show you in the slide, is feeding that data, could be data or information, back to the human, okay? But the information data that it's feeding back to the human depends on what the goal is. Is the goal to teach the human something? Okay, is it to mentor? Is it scaffolding? Is it tutoring? Is it collaborating? Is it teaming? Depending on the verb that you have here. Okay, and then, so we see multiple cycles of this that may take a certain while in cycles for the human digital twin to be an actual replica of the human. Okay, if we take this to the next level, okay, in the lab, and of course this is just to exemplify, these are not actors, these are former students of mine, okay, to show you this. And you can tell they're very thrilled about doing this video because you can just look at their facial expressions. Yeah, either that or they haven't had too much coffee. Okay, so Michelle Taub here, my former student and current colleague, is pretending to be the student, just like the one you saw. And then Nick here, it could represent the researcher, one of us, could be the expert on SRL metacognition, could be a teacher, could be a tutor, trainer, or a human digital twin. Okay, and the idea is, imagine, so we're focusing really heavily on the left-hand side, as Michelle is representing. But the question is, what about if we instrumented this person here who could play multiple roles, and we're also collecting the multimodal data? So when Michelle looks confused, and Nick has access to our facial expression and other multimodal data, what is Nick's multimodal data saying and expressing, okay, and potentially learning about the student? So here's a little, just a brief snippet. Yes, and go. There you go. So Michelle is using Crystal Island. This is one of the game environment. You can see her eye tracking data. You just saw the balls bouncing. She's making choices. Okay, she is physiologically, she's got the physiological sensor, all the data, there's the eye tracker. And so Nick now, yes, we would not actually, this is for demonstration, we would not have the portable eye tracker on him, we would actually have the same eye tracker. But he has access, and of course he would actually be physically separated. He would not be next to her, this is just for demonstration, right? But yeah, but if this was a digital twin, if this was a teacher, this was an expert, a researcher, okay, when she looks confused, okay, what does he look at? Does he look at her face because trying to interpret that? Does he look at her physiological data? Okay. Does he look at the signals that indicate that she's confused? And one of this thing is to basically, could potentially be how we could design a human digital twin based on students' real-time data. This could also be done post hoc. So if we think about this, right, across different tasks, and we're trying to have this human digital twin, we're also working on this framework that if the goal is to build a human digital twin, right? Okay, and so here we may have in the lab, in the classroom, in some training context, a student that's fully instrumented, generating multimodal data. We could potentially have a teacher, okay? The student here dressed in red, she's also generating lots of multimodal, multi-channel data, right? That data, some data could be automatically fed into the digital twin as it's developing the replica of the student, okay? But in some cases, and in real time, we still would have someone like us, a researcher, who in the loop, who's also making some inferences about some of the data because that data has not been automated, okay? So we're working on the development of this framework and how this is the synchrony, the data collection, the inferences, the feedback cycles, and then ultimately is how do we design that human digital twin to represent this student, okay? We're doing this in a lot of applications. I don't want to emphasize the military aspects, but so everything from, obviously, we are here at University of Central Florida, we're surrounded by the 5 branches of the military. The military has been one that's been funding a lot of our institutes for decades now, but it could also be for mission planning, right? For astronaut mission training, so many applications, medical and physiological support systems, and then a lot of the maintenance and repair operations that the military has. But to focus on more educational aspects is to show some of these images is it could be medical, right? So imagine Megan, right? It's a medical purpose. So this is a patient, right? A patient, we have our genome data that is embodied in her human digital twin, and we can do disease progression, right? If she has a certain condition, for example, has been diagnosed, she can actually imagine being able to interrogate or talk to or ask questions of what is going to happen to you medically, 5 years from now, 5 weeks from now, etc. Or in this case, where we have an expert, like a physical therapist who's an immersive environment called a blended the Bliss Simulation Center, right? How do we help? Can we have a digital twin? Because Dr. Tucker is not available all the time. But imagine I'm an undergrad student in physical therapy, and I want to learn basically how to physically manipulate the limbs of premature babies, right? But she's not available always to give me feedback. But if I had a digital twin that could live, right, in this immersive environment, that version of her could potentially provide me with didactic information, additional feedback, etc. In terms of immersive environments, right, is basically imagine having one of us as an expert in self-regulation and metacognition, being able to externalize and teach metacognitive knowledge, declarative knowledge, procedural knowledge, conditional knowledge to a bunch of artificial agents that then can be, if you will, unleashed into a classroom, onto a student's laptop, right? So they can work, let's say they're doing their algebra and physics problems at home or at the coffee shop in some informal setting, or an immersive environment, okay? And a lot of this also is in terms of nurse practitioners, our College of Nursing. So we have a standardized patient, right, who pretends to have a particular medical condition. And the question is, how do we have a preceptor who's the expert trainer, right, give feedback, right? But this person, again, they're very costly, right? There aren't that many, but this patient, this nurse practitioner expert could potentially live in a clinical setting. Or as the example I gave on Monday, I could be a teacher, right? And I have my class, a representation of my class in immersive environmental chemistry. And, we're going to change topics. We're going to another unit. It's going to be very conceptually challenging for these students. And I have a representation of, let's say, my top students here, all the way to a representation of my potentially most challenging students. And basically, imagine being able to simulate through the simulated learners, which are a version of human digital twin, how these students are going to, what challenges are they going to be confused? Are they going to get frustrated, right? Are they going to be able to engage in metacognitive monitoring, the fact that they are not really understanding what is being taught, right? So it could be for teacher training, right? But it could also be for students. Like, let's say I'm going to do that topic, right? But I know I'm already struggling in chemistry. I'm going to struggle even more, okay? But show me, let's say, I could be the kid in the red shirt, and the other 5 kids, for example, could be kids that are more able in my class, and I want to see how they monitor and regulate and solve those problems, and maybe I can learn something and be better prepared when it comes to class. So there's a lot of potential applications for this, right? However, there's still obviously some challenges and lots of opportunities. Is how would we integrate human digital twins that are AI based into existing curricula? That's been one of our challenges, right? Because we're all seen as the outsiders. I'm not the teacher. I'm not the school administrator, right? How do we prepare and educate the trainer to use some of these tools, right? In terms of thinking about technology acceptance. How do we deal with the diversity of learners? Who are we modeling in the human digital twin? Is it the ideal student, the ideal teacher, the ideal, or is it some kind of combination, right? How do we test those? We have no ways right now or methods for testing this transferability of if a human actually interacted with the digital twin. How do we measure that impact? Of course, plenty of ethics and equity issues, right? Especially in terms of privacy and data access, the assessment of metacognition and self-regulation, right? The traditional methods that we have are not good enough, all right? We have to develop new ones. And then we also lack models of human AI co-regulation. There's a lot in the literature that has been published in the last 2.5, 3 years, but there's still a lot of work to be done, okay? And then one of them is the teacher AI collaboration, right? There's very limited research on how we can support teachers in terms of integrating and adopting and then really collaborating, if you will, with these digital twins, whether it's a digital twin of themselves as teachers or digital twin of their students, okay? So we have lots of questions and challenges, right? But again, of definitions, integration of these models between human metacognition and artificial metacognition, lots of methodological and analytical issues to be had, especially as we develop. We still need to have the human in the loop to a certain point. The temporal dynamics and synchronicity need to be addressed, okay? And especially in the area of metacognition, self-regulation, we tend to emphasize the quantitative aspects, right? How many sequences? How long did someone spend metacognitive monitoring? But we also need to focus on the qualitative changes. When are qualitative changes, okay, happening during those phases and cycles of metacognition? And then fundamentally is the question, what is the role or roles and the functions and effectiveness of these digital twins, right? And then the integration, what we really need more is integration of those, of the field of, if you will, of artificial metacognition, including those metacognitive architectures with human metacognition. And yeah, so there's process issues. Can we start using these digital twins also as research method tools? So think about, like, as researchers, we use SPSS, we use R, right, to do our analysis. Well, why not think about these digital twins as new research methodologies? Imagine I want to test a new scaffolding approach. Imagine having a model and simulation environment where I can ask the environment, I want you to generate 1,000 digital twins of, let's say, high school students with different levels of skills and knowledge. Okay. And we're going to do this kind of scaffolding. And I want it to simulate, right, the progressions, the trajectories, and which students are really going to learn, which students are not. And then imagine going the next step is actually then getting the modeling and simulation to explain why certain of those digital twins did not learn either the metacognitive skills or the content knowledge, right? To have that kind of explainability. So going back to going from description to prediction to explainability, right? Those last two phases, we're really missing that. And it's frustrating when we have people ask us questions and we usually have this typical psychology answer. Well, it depends. And it's like, well, that's not good enough, right? And then it's going to leave you off with some of the work that we're doing. This is a 3-year NSF grant that was just funded on simulated learners for algebra problem solving, word problems for high school students. As imagine, the student gets to explicitly teach their knowledge and skills, right, to simulated learners. They're fully instrumented, so that data is also being collected, right? And then we reverse the roles. Now the digital twin, right, is now going to be externalizing with voice and explaining and solving the problem the way you said you would, right? But sometimes it will create errors to trigger that metacognitive awareness and monitoring and start that interrogation. Like, I don't know about that skill. Can you tell me what that metacognitive strategy is? Is that more effective? Why is it more effective? So now we have a dialogue between the student and its digital twin, right? Through a lot of justification, refining, improving strategies. And then basically at the end is to simulate the learners and prepare them for more complex algebra problems. We're now working with several schools to be able to do this, and our colleagues in computer science are the ones developing the environment. And then, really taking advantage of Gen AI, right, to actually develop the psychological profile and multimodal. So I asked it, so for example, this is ChatGPT and Claude, right? I asked it to take Winnie's COPES model, which is the conditions, operations, products, evaluation, and standards, right? And I asked it to basically give it the simulated learner begins by reading. So it's literally giving me the scenario that we should take and model in these digital twins, of course, with a little bit of tweaking based on teachers' input. Okay. And then, for example, so what would the simulated student do in terms of dialogue and talking to the student, right? Engaging the conversation. What would be the multimodal data that a student could show? So, for example, the human learner produces patterns of eye fixations that reveal how their attention is distributed across the problem context, okay? And then what would also be the multimodal data that the simulated student or learner would also show, because we want to make that visible to the learner, right? So here's an advantage of taking current Gen AI tools to develop these scripts. Okay, of course, we have to have prompt engineering, but these can literally be taken and fed into the system, and the human digital twin can start modeling these processes for the learner. Okay. And I'll just finish it off there. Yes, so this work is not possible, obviously, with a huge lab like ours and lots and lots and lots of wonderful and excellent collaborators, both here in Florida, US, and also across the world. And this is just a snippet of some of the collaborators and their universities. And yes, and thank you so much for your attention. Okay, I think we'll stop sharing, if that's okay.
So thank you so much, Roger, for a fascinating keynote. We'll now move to the Q&A section. And if anyone has a question, they can, yeah, Tzvi.
So I want to suggest that when you look at teachers or instructors that teach specific subject matter for several years or many students over time,
Yep.
they don't have all this, sensory information like I want, and they don't need it, because what they do need and they do use is they would ask some questions at specific times, the students. It could be personal questions or it could be related to the subject matter. And they are like doctors who are very good at diagnosing the student states and what they don't understand, or but they're specific to this subject matter. If they now move to a different topic, they might not be as effective. So what I'm trying to suggest is that the AI could perhaps, gauge the metacognitive state and help the student by asking these kinds of questions. And the reason I'm saying that is that I did quite a bit of work on AI for medical. And today, AI is actually quite good, some say very good, at diagnosing medical situations. And the reason is that doctors are being taught how to diagnose, while teachers, not so much. I mean, like a doctor, you come to a family doctor, he has those scenarios, he has those algorithms. He or she may deviate a bit, but there's a lot of text on how to do it. And in teaching, not. But if you did have it for a specific, like for your tank scenario or for the medical, and you gave it to an AI, I think it could do it very well.
Yeah. No, absolutely, Tibi. The scary part is, and we've seen the gamut, right? I mean, we've been examining and working with teachers, for more than 2 decades. And so I'm amazed is, for example, I can go to school about 20 minutes down the road. And when I sit in that chemistry class, and that teacher is such a wonderful teacher. I mean, the kids, it's like they're eating out of her hand. I mean, the quality, right, of the teaching, the explanation, the attention is amazing. The scary part is from our sampling, and then also being here in Florida, then we go to some of our less popular schools, like more impoverished, lower SES kids, and the teachers are burnt out. I mean, the teachers are basically, I mean, we've got to classrooms where teachers are just sitting there. They won't even get up. Like the kid has a problem. It's like, can you at least make the effort to get up and show that you care about that child, right? About teaching and learning, right? So we would love to, those are the teachers, because then it's like you're not actually, hurting those students, because you don't see the enthusiasm for the teachers, the love for learning, right? So one question is, can we help those teachers, right? Not be better teachers, but also love what they do. I mean, love to teach, right? If you will, right? But I also have to tell you, and I think I mentioned this on Monday, right? Is the fact that, for example, we have pre-service teachers getting their bachelor's in our College of Education, and this has happened when I was in Maryland, happens here, and the teachers are not being taught about metacognition. They're not being taught about emotion regulation, about like regulating students' motivation, cognitive strategies. And the question is like, how is that possible, right? And so the question is, can we support now that they're not, because, whether it's state mandated or federally mandated, right? The question is, can we work with them to provide them tools where the AI can help? Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you.
So if let's say here, as we are the group of people that are interested in self-regulated learning, what should be the first step that you suggest from your experience, just to give them the candy that will be the first step?
Candy.
Yeah, to wrap it up for them.
Sure.
Nicely. Yeah.
No, absolutely. So there are a couple of seminal readings, right, that provide the foundation. I mean, if we want to go back historically, there's the Flavel.
Yeah, so many years we try and try.
Yeah, and the pinch ridge, right? One place to start, which is actually dated, there's a new version coming out, would be the Handbook of Self-Regulation and Performance, right? That's still the 2018. There's a new version coming out. Some of us have been contributing to that. So there's a couple of papers looking at the Panadero 2017 that kind of compares 6 different models that have been used, right? And then
we suggest them to make a digital twin, and save time and effort, the know-how?
Yeah, so that we're gonna have to work with technologists, right? So yeah, so the combination. So for example, with the digital twin for math high school, I've been working with the superintendent of one of our counties, right? And then her team, right, including her AI folks, including of course security folks and all that, to figure out exactly, right? But we do this very much from a bottom-up approach. It's meeting with the teachers, it's observing, spending so much time observing classrooms. What do they do? Focus group of the teachers, the students, etc. Like before we even think about developing a digital twin, yeah. But we have some documents that we could share. We have no problem doing that. Now, for thinking about the fundamentals, there is one book that I love. And I can share the citations. So there was a student many moons ago. It's a Taricone, Pina Taricone in 2011 published a book, which was actually her dissertation, and it's called The Taxonomy of Metacognition. And she did a wonderful job because she reviewed philosophy of science, developmental psychology, meta memory, and she actually has one picture that shows the complexity really of metacognition, self-regulation, right? Yeah, and that's the other thing. It's so complex, we can't encompass everything, right? So yeah, but I can share some of those. I can share those with Noah and Ina. I can share, and then they can. So let me write some here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question. Is
Yeah.
there any data on the precision of the predictions, for example, in medical decision making? I mean, I don't know how long it's been in the market, so whether there is data that was predicted against what actually happened, progression of diseases, progression of students, and so on.
Oh, for the digital twin?
Yeah.
Example? No, we're still working on that, right? And in fact, we're still working through not only the ethics, but the data privacy issues of sharing people's biomedical knowledge, right? So for example, we just had a wonderful talk this morning by an administrator for one of our major healthcare systems. And so they're very interested in that. But the question is, how do we protect, right, that data? Because if somebody hacks into that data, if they have your genome project data, then that can also be, obviously a major issue for many reasons, right? And then the question becomes then, can we so here's I guess the dark side of that, right? So because if we have somebody's genome and we have a digital twin of them, can we now start making medical experiments, like gene manipulation and what happens, and then we're doing disease progression, right? But we're thinking it from at least from a medical education training, because imagine your typical, health science student or medical student, right? If I want to learn about, for example, Parkinson's disease, I'm going to be looking maybe at a video, right? Reading about it in a text. But imagine now me standing in front of an actual patient, right? Who is showing, let's say, phase 1. But imagine now, can we ask the AI to disease progression, show me all the phases that this patient would go through in terms of Parkinson. Imagine being able to accelerate the education and training and expertise development, for example, right? Or as a teacher, I'm a novice teacher, just graduated, right? And my gosh, I do not know how to motivate my students, but we have all the data on motivation regulation strategies, right? And you seeing yourself using those in a future classroom, right?
Yeah.
Because where else would you be able to practice that, right? Other than your real classroom, right? Yeah.
But isn't it very deterministic? I mean, you have various possibilities of disease progression, or people can stop the disease.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. So it could be, show me the ideal, if there is an ideal progression, for example, but then imagine it being able to show all the different variability in that disease progression, right? Yeah. And then the other thing that's interesting is when we work with Dr. Hoffman in College of Health Professional Sciences and her team, she pulled up one case with somebody with Huntington's disease, which I've never seen anybody with Huntington's disease. And I have to tell you that if I was a clinician and if that was my patient, it would be a very awkward and unprofessional interaction. I don't know if you've ever seen someone with Huntington's. As soon as this person came in front of me, right, I was so struck about what I was seeing. I'm trying to do my best emotional regulation because it's so vivid, it's so memorable. that all I can think is like, how does this person sleep? How does this person rest? Because there's a lot of motor movement. Their spine is like, they're standing, but they're like bent almost backward, right? And apparently they die also very young, right? So imagine this kind of environment where I can practice how I can have a professional interaction, clinical interaction, right, with this patient without looking unprofessional, if you will, right? But you're right. Can you show all of these variability, right, within a disease etiology? Yeah.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
I have a questions.
Yes.
Rog'er.
Hey, Joe, how are you?
Hi. Thank you for your wonderful presentation and interesting, as usual.
Oh, thank you.
I think that metacognitive and self-regulation learning became more challenging now. And the terms need to be maybe changed, because when you say metacognitive, it's the thinking about the thinking.
Yeah.
And we need to remember that the AI is not thinking.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
this is the challenging. Is only processing data. And the feeling of the learner is that I am chatting with a learner, or I collaborate with another peer of learning. So this is the challenging terms that became much more now, I think. Something we need to model new thing, or to think a new term. But this is the challenging, that we are regular with metacognitive or self-regulation learning, but now come to our life a new hybrid intelligent, which is not thinking.
It's not thinking. No, absolutely. Yes.
So this is the challenging.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Tova. Yeah, and I think it's a mistake. So you see some of these Gen AI tools where it's like you see, oh, it's thinking. It's like it's not thinking, it's pretending. And some of my colleagues, like in computer science and AI, are trying to give it tasks. So they're comparing the Gen AI thinking to a human thinking, and that from an academic perspective is interesting. But it's not thinking. You're absolutely right, right? And this is also brings up two other issues. One is that's why, for example. We're writing a piece where we really need to think about that human metacognition is different than artificial metacognition, right? So, for example, we're working with Manuel Caro, and it's like beautiful. It's computational models, it's parameters. I go, but the human, like, what is the equivalent of a parameter in a metacognitive architecture versus a process in a real human, right? That is biologically, designed. Right. So absolutely. Yeah. And this is also, I think, where like it's been challenging for us to even take Sana and Allison's models of SSRL, because the SSRL models are based on assumptions of a human interacting with another human.
Yes.
Right.
Social of humans and not
not the
artificial.
AI. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, so it's forcing us into these issues. Absolutely. Yeah. And we saw like there was a new Nature paper that just came out a couple of days ago, and there's a new model of metacognition for Gen AI, but it's based on System 1 and System 2. I go, yes, but when you look at the model, you're missing so many human elements that make us unique, that our metacognitive and self-regulatory process are so unique compared to a machine, right, or an AI. Absolutely. But what can we bring together?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rog'er, for two thought-provoking talks and for the very interesting discussions. And thank you to all of the participants who have stayed with us until the end of this 3-day journey. I hereby declare the 2026 Chase Conference officially closed, and now I can finally go back to sleeping at night.
Oh, no.
So good night, everyone.
Rog'er, you have the whole day.
Yes. Thank you so much. Yeah. No, Anina, for the invitation. It's wonderful to spend time with you. And maybe next time it'll be in person. Okay. And thank you for staying so late.
And we hope to see everyone again next year. So good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.